So now we move on after the interval, which we would have had at that point in the concert, to a composer who lived within the same time that Allegri did. He was born after Allegri and died before Allegri died. Allegri had a very long life. So Monteverdi, what I think is interesting about him is that although he was also worked all his life and I think was a priest actually, as many people were, the kind of the musicians and singers in these choirs were sometimes also priests, so they kind of had a dual role. It wasn't quite the same relationship as it might be in modern cathedrals. But Monteverdi, although he wrote a lot of sacred music, and you can't, it's he published his music in large collections, so it's a bit hard to tell sometimes what was written when. So the Vespers, the Monteverdi's Vespers, which are very famous, and again I hope we'll do sometime in the next few years, is a magnificent piece, and many of his other works are in a kind of older style. It's still quite, if you think of other composers such as Palestrina or that kind of ecclesiastical style, you hear, you'd listen to them, you think, oh yes, this is liturgical church music, and certainly there are things like his mass and various motets which you'd think that and you'd say yes, they're definitely church music. However, Monteverdi was a real pioneer in the development of opera. In many ways, the first famous opera composer. The Coronation of Poppea is perhaps the most famous, but there are others. And a lot of his theatrical output was lost, so he was actually prolific and wrote a large amount of stage work. And in his time, he worked for the court at Mantua for a long time, and that was a real development point for all the mechanics of the stage, the opera machinery. They were very adventurous with having people flying about on wonderful machines and on wires, and there were kind of machines to make smoke and special effects. It was all very creative and imaginative. So a piece such as Beatus Via, which was written later on in Monteverdi's life, published 2 years before his death in 1641, in that collection of a whole load of his music from the second half of his life. There's much more what you might term as a secular feeling. You've got this dance idea with the instrumentalists playing. That's not music that you would hear at first and think, yes, this is a setting of the Psalms. You'd think this is kind of like dance music, perhaps you were going to go and hear at a party, or it's for an opera. So there's a kind of a modernization, really, of what church music should be. And you can imagine that, I don't know if it was controversial at the time, or if he was so established that it wasn't, but I think they must have rather enjoyed hearing this kind of music in the chapel setting. So here's a recording, a nice recording of the version with strings. It's sung in this version 1/2 apart. Please do sing along. If you want to sing along the solo bits as well, feel free. The music follows along as it goes through, so it's pretty easy to follow. So you can hear the instruments as it was originally intended. Quite a small limited forces, not too complicated, a couple of violins. He was also a pioneer in the use of basso continuo. So this is moving away from the idea of polyphony, where you've got between 3 and 6 or more parts with equal prominence, to the idea of bass and melody. So you've got, and this is something he did very much in the opera, in his operatic work, a basso continuo section, which might be an organ with a cello playing the bass line, organ playing chords, also theorbos and various other lute-like instruments strumming along as theorbos and things like that, making a kind of harmony section. So this is a very kind of modern idea for this time. We're still talking mid 17th century here, so it's still pretty early. Anyway, so enjoy this one. See you in a minute.